All right, everyone. Review Realm here. The end of 2020 is here. Thank God, I suppose. It's about that time of year for us. Each of us gets into our top 10 favorite albums of the year. So you'll be seeing a top 10 from myself. You'll be seeing a top 10 from Sam here as well. Now, the rules for the top 10 albums of the year has always changed a little bit. With mine, I'm going to go with ones that we just reviewed for the year. So each one of these albums that I'm going to be talking about here, we've done a review for. So you're free to check those out as well. Let's get right to it. I'm going to go first, and then Sam's going to present his top 10. And Sam is going to react. He hasn't seen this. I haven't seen his. So this will be interesting for the both of us here. Getting into my top 10 albums of the year. Number 10 might be a little bit of surprise. Number 10 for me is Music to Be Murdered by Eminem. Now, this comes as a big surprise, probably because, the genre of hip-hop as a whole is still really something new to me. There's a lot of, people that, maybe bring up an artist or something like that, and usually most of the time I haven't heard of it. Eminem is not one of those artists. Everybody knows who this man is, no matter what genre of music you may listen to. So he's always sat with me throughout the years as being one of the most important artists of that genre. Whenever he puts out an album, I'm always interested in it. And I gotta say, this one, there's a lot of tracks on here that I was pretty happy with. Like you said in the review, Sam, he has a style to him. His style of rapping has not changed at all. I liked a lot of what he talked about lyrically and everything on this album. The genre is still something that's not really my forte. I find things that I like, surprisingly, with this album. That's my number 10 for 2020. Number 9 is Lamb of God's self-titled album. This album should not be number 9. When they put out an album, there's always a lot of excitement behind it. Even before Randy's incarceration, there's always been high anticipation for their albums. So with this album, when Checkmate dropped, I remember our friend group, not being incredibly excited about it. It's still a decent Lamb of God track, but kind of thrown for a loop a little bit. Listening to the album as a whole, I definitely think it's not the most solid Lamb of God album. That's not to say that I didn't still find things that didn't stick out to me. I really liked Memento Mori. I liked New Colossal Hate. Routes with Chuck Billy from Testament. So even though it's not the best Lamb of God album, it still had, songs that I still went back to throughout the year that I still like to listen to. The way the album flows and everything like that is the downside to this. And that's why I have it at number 9 here. So that's my number 9 for 2020.
Number 9.
Well, now it's number 8. Number 8 for this year is Protest to Heroes, Palimpsest. This album's been out since June, and I still got to make sure I get the pronunciation down right for this one. This is one of the albums this year that was a surprise to me. Like I said in the review, I hadn't listened to this band prior, but I had always heard the name before. I was pleasantly surprised with this album. I liked the concept behind it. Not hearing any material from them prior to this, it was a nice sit down. One of the songs, that I keep going back to from this album was Rivet. Rivet was probably one of the, I liked the ideas behind it. I had those small instrumentals, that were by a side. I had to put it on my top 10 just because of how pleasantly surprised I was. So that's my number 8 for 2020. And number 7 this year falls very similarly in line with my number 8 album. My number 7 is Haken's Virus.
I feel you.
He's like, I very much agree with this top 10 so far. Yeah, Haken was another band that I had not heard anything from prior. Virus was my first sit down, and kind of go in line with Protest the Hero. I didn't know what they sounded like at all, musically, vocalists and everything like that. The mixing was done really well and everything like that. But having, this style of vocals blended in with heavier music, was a really nice surprise to me. One of the tracks from this album that I was going back to throughout the year was Carousel. Pleasantly surprised by songs like Prosthetic and Invasion. The whole idea of the all these songs, having the Messiah complex in them, all pretty interesting. I like finding music like this. I like finding, things that catch my ear and, that surprise me. Virus is one of those albums this year that definitely did that for me. So that's my number 7 for 2020. The number 6 album is a big one, I guess, depending on who you ask. But to me, it was, because this was the first album we reviewed this year. My number 6 is the Ghost Inside's self-titled album. I think one of the big things that surrounds this album is the circumstances behind it. He definitely addressed it in the album review. The band, this is like comeback story like of the decade, I would say, like in the metal genre, like coming back from a horrible bus accident that left some people dead, having to like pretty much learn to like walk again, everything like that, like doing all this everyday stuff, and then like learning how to play instruments again and everything like that, pretty much like starting over. And I love that that's the message of this album, like finally are able to like fix themselves after such a terrible thing and put out an album like this. And that is the obvious message on this album, with like songs like Still Alive, Phoenix Rise, Make or Break. You definitely hear pain from that tragedy, but you also hear about the journey of them fixing it. And so I knew that this album, it had to be in the top 10 somewhere. I just really liked the message behind it. I like that the Ghost Inside is back. And, when things get all fixed again, this will be a very important chapter for this band when they're able to play shows and everything like that again. So that's my number 6 for this year. Number 5 for this year. I'm a little surprised at the placement for this one, but I guess I'll explain that. Number 5 this year is Hatebreed's Weight of the False Self. I think, like we said in the album review, Hatebreed's not a band that changes it up a whole lot. I think they're one of the bands in the genre that puts out an album and they maybe like add a few different things in every album, but overall usually a Hatebreed album is pretty similar from one to the next. And while this album might not be the most standout from them per se, they're always a band I enjoy listening to whenever they put out material. So Weight of the False Self still had some things that stand out to me. One of the songs being Cling to Life. That's one I've went back to, the last couple of months since it came out. Yeah, I think I just like that about Hatebreed. The fact that they kind of like stick to their guns, stick to what they're familiar with. And you know what? I'm happy with it. It doesn't matter to me if they don't change things up a whole lot. Putting out material like this, I'm satisfied with it. So that's my number 5 for this year. My number 4 this year goes to Sepultura Quadra. This is something that we definitely addressed in the review, is that I think Sepultura is really overlooked in the genre. I think they've been overlooked, since the days with Max Cavalera ended a long time ago. I think the thing that I try to tell people is that they're still putting out good material. Quadra was no exception to that. I was really happy with the last album they put out a few years ago. They're not a band I think one should sleep on. I mean, yeah, you have a lot of the very important albums from them back in the day. I still think they're doing a great job. Don't take away from the great vocalist that is Derek Green. He still does a really good job with this band. Quadra was another one that surprised me, because this band is still putting out a lot of good material. I hope more people see that the material that they're putting out is pretty solid. So that's my number 4 album for this year. Number 3 for this year. Sam, this had to be placed somewhere. You didn't know where it was going to be placed. It had to be in the top 3 somewhere. Number 3 is Trivium's What the Dead Men Say.
Not the one I was thinking of, but that clarifies.
It's not. Okay. Number 3 for this year goes out to Trivium. This band is very important to me. Whenever they put out an album, they don't tell you that they're making an album. First off, kind of know what the pattern, when to expect an album from them. Maybe I love the build up that they do for albums. They kind of just like start teasing it for a little while, and then they're like, boom, we're putting out a new album. Here's when it comes out. Yeah, so they did that with What the Dead Men Say way at the beginning of the year. The first taste of the album back in February with Catastrophist. They always managed to change up their style like just a little bit. They always managed to do something a little bit different than on the last album. What the Dead Men Say was like, it was slightly different than the last album, but they still managed to throw in a bunch of different stuff here. And then you still have those songs that kind of throw you back to like the Ascendancy days with songs like The Defiant. I know, Sam, that you didn't really feel too strongly about the album, maybe. It's still one of the albums I could not stop listening to throughout the year.
So the thing with Trivium, and I won't jump too far in, but I'll at least say that the Catastrophist was definitely one of the takeaway tracks of the whole year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Trivium's just always been a band that always loved the material that they put out. And I always know they're going to be in my top 10 somewhere throughout the year, pending what other material comes out throughout the year and everything like that. I don't know where I'm going to place them, But, with albums like What the Dead Men Say, I know it's going to be in there somewhere. Here it is at number 3 for the year. Last 2 for the year. Few albums that I haven't touched upon yet. Where are these albums that, we know that you like? Well, here's one of them for you. Number 2 is Killer Be Killed's Reluctant Hero. Now, there was a lot of anticipation behind this album because this is only the second album that this supergroup has put out. The first album back in 2014 just being such a banger, like such a huge surprise, by the music that all of these guys created together. Another thing that's important about this band, Sam, is it's right around the time that we met.
This is true.
I think Killer Be Killed is one of the bands that I think we kind of discovered that, this friend group we had, what a similar taste in music we all had. I think I remember you at one point saying recommending Killer Be Killed. I said, "Oh, cool, what's that?" And I put on the album and just a huge surprise with how well it came out. This second album, Reluctant Hero, was one we were talking about a lot. Had a lot of anticipation behind it because of that first album. It's really on par with the first album, I'd say. I was really happy with the material on this album though. It just sounded like they didn't skip a beat. Yeah, it may have been 6 years apart, but we're still constantly writing music. To be like this, that's why I had to put it at number 2 here. That's my number 2 for this year. I was my number 2.
So that leaves only one album for number 1.
One album. What could be?
Is exactly what I think it is.
What could be the number 1 album of the year for me, you ask? Number 1 album of the year goes to Static X. Project Regeneration Volume 1. I think you saw this one coming. Yes is the answer. The reason this album is number 1 here, I talked about a lot in the review. The fact that we got this album is still such a surprise to me, given the circumstances surrounding the band. The thing that made this album such a surprise is, the very sad and unfortunate death of Wayne Static back in 2014. The band had already been, broken up for a little bit before that. It's sad, but, Wayne was just going down a dark path that, led to his passing. I think a lot of fans of this band thought at the time any hope of, all the members maybe reconciling and, fixing their differences and everything like that was gone. Face of the band passed away. When they announced that this album, I was like, how are you going to do that? And they managed to find these old recordings of Wayne and use them to make new music, but they also find new vocalists that they don't put a lot of the focus on because they want it to be kind of a memorial to Wayne, and to have him sound so much like Wayne, you can hardly tell who's who throughout this album. And the fact that they're sitting on so much material that they added Volume 1. Volume 2 I hope is coming out maybe sometime in 2021. And maybe they might just be the first band for me to have number 1 albums in a row. To have all these circumstances, surrounding this band, to lead up to an album like this, just such a great surprise. And the material on the album just put a big smile on my face because I love this band. Being able to hear them now just really makes people happy. And I hope the band knows that. I think they know that. There you have it, folks. And now, pass it off to Sam, who's going to be sharing his top 10 albums for 2020.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, John has done his top 10. Please let us know what you think of his top 10. John did all of the ones that we reviewed, and something that we got to stop doing is skipping halfway throughout the year because there's a lot of albums we missed out on. My top 10 is going to include a lot of albums that some of them we did review, some of them we did not review. We're going to kick it off, John, right now. Sam's top 10 albums of 2020.
Let's see.
Number 10, Raised in a Doomsday Cult by Good Tiger. Okay, this is a band that I've always been a big fan of. I love Elliot Coleman's voice. I don't remember, did we review this one? This is one I was kind of flaky on.
We did not. The name of the album until now. Honestly.
I don't think it's their best work, but it's one of the more solid releases of the year. The singles that came out were really good. I think this is the first album out, the original drummer, Alex Rudinger. Good Tiger's just always a good listen. It's kind of like listening to, I'd say, almost like the Mars Volta in the sense where you can put on any of their albums and you can just enjoy them start to finish. And Raised in a Doomsday Cult is no different in my eyes. Number 9. What could be my number 9?
Niner.
Lunar by Eminent. So this is actually, I actually know these guys, and they released this new EP. This is actually an EP. It's not really an album, but this was a tech death band. This wasn't really even on my radar until I listened to it the second time. I'm not listening to as much tech death anymore, but this album stuck out. This one was just heavy, balls to the wall. Opening track of Sarin, I think, kicks off the just in your fucking face. It reminds me of the Acacia Strain a little bit with how heavy they are. Obviously, they're not a well-known artists, and I would like to see these guys become more well-known. So if you haven't checked out this album, I would highly advise doing so. Number 8. See, the great thing about my top 10s is John probably thinks I make up half the artists that I put on these lists. Because you're like, I don't even know what the hell that is. Number 8, band Sordid Pink. Their self-titled debut album. This actually, if you're not familiar with a band out of Czechoslovakia, I know I sound like a hipster. Ooh. Somewhere over there in Eastern Europe. They were originally a band called Destiny Potato, and they were kind of genty. But this album took it back a little bit. Still very metal-like, but it has a more melodic moments, very groovy at times. They have a female vocalist. She has a phenomenal voice. The tracks that got me was the opening track, Killer, singles Drive, and FU. This was the kind of stuff when everything was going on throughout the year. This was generally the album I'd put on, and it was just good to just drive. I'd smoke a cigar, and I would drive to kind of bring everything down and enjoy myself. And I think I mentioned with the Gorillaz and a couple other artists this year, I was looking for just moods, environments to kind of be in with most of my music. And this album is no less. Number 7. Number 7 is not going to come to a surprise to anyone, especially those who are friends of mine, obviously John. And like we've discussed, we're not too well versed in the genre of hip-hop. The new Gorillaz album, Song Machine Season 1, Strange Times. I've been listening, like I said, Demon Days, Plastic Beach all year. And this album was coming out one song by one song. It doesn't flow like some other albums do, but over time, this album has grown on me. There's just a lot to it. Désolé is a track that sticks out for me. The opening track with Robert Smith, Strange Time, the title track. Some of the extra songs towards the end, because there is like a deluxe edition I think we discussed in the review. Even now, this weekend after Christmas, I think I threw on this album. Just while I was cleaning, just threw it on, enjoyed the moment. But that is my number 7.
Not where I thought it would be. Interesting.
Number 6, I didn't think this album was going to be this high for me. Not because I think it's a bad album, but because there were so many other albums that I listened to this year I really liked. And when I was trying to put this list together, this one came up higher than I expected. And it deserves to be so. John, our first overlap album of 2020. Killer Be Killed's Reluctant Heroes.
Oh, okay.
There's something about this band that just has chemistry. Not many supergroups can put out 2 albums and just sound like flawless. And I said during the review, I think over time this album is going to grow on us. All the stuff that everyone thought might have been maybe a weak point in the album was going to grow on us. And I would say that this album might almost be flawless. I can't really argue any flaws with this album, except for the fact that it took 6 years to follow up.
Right.
But it's well deserved. That 6 years was well deserved. Everyone on this album sounds great. Like we said, opening the album like a Killer Be Killed album and ending it the way they did with the title track Reluctant Hero, which might be the best track.
That was a big surprise, that one, yeah.
I just hope we don't have to wait 6 years or even in Tool time, 18 years for another album from these guys.
Right.
If you don't know who Killer Be Killed are by now, what are you doing? Like, what do you listen to metal? These guys, and even though they're older, the band sounds fresh. They don't sound like old musicians playing what they would have played when they started writing music. No, these are guys who know how to still write relevant music.
Yeah. Also not where I thought it would be.
Number 5, over the past couple of years, John and I have been doing this. It should be no surprise that I like progressive music. I've seen this band a few times, and this is a band that's grown on me. The more I listen to them, the more I see them. Intronaut, Fluid Existential Inversions. This is a band, I forgot who, I think they opened up for Between the Buried and Me the first time I saw them, and they're very, very out there, very jazz-influenced. Cubensis, I think that was one of the first singles. It pulls you in. If you like just something noodly, jazzy, heavy music, this whole album, start to finish, is really good. This is a band who you think might become maybe a little less relevant over time, but as they've written their albums, they don't have many. I think they have like 4. They've gotten better, and this might be their best work. So if you're not familiar with the Intronaut and you like progressive music, experimental music, Intronaut is definitely one you guys need to get your hands on. So John, this is going to get weird for the next couple. Questionably might be one of the most popular artists in the world on my list. That's not a metal band. Obviously, I don't have anything pop related per se, or something nothing Taylor Swift-esque. This is a band that when I first was introduced to them, I love their sound. And I've always been attracted to these guys. And this album is no different than the last few. Ladies and gentlemen, number 4, The Slow Rush by Tame Impala. This album came out, I think, at the beginning of the year. And they've always had this weird, it's not like a synthwave sound. The mixing is it's almost lo-fi-esque. It sounds like you put on that very infamous lo-fi channel, John, that you and I listen to.
Oh yeah, the chilled cow.
Yeah, and it sounds dated in terms of the mixing, but I enjoy it. Everything from the opening track, songs like Borderline on this, Breathe Deeper. It's able to take an older sound and bring it into the modern day, the 2020s. This is the album I think I started the year off with. I put it on this week and I'm like, this album is still gold. If you guys like something a little more mellow, a little more out there, ambient, definitely worth the listen. Number 3, John. This is the one I think your head might roll. So I did a podcast for Open Frequency Radio a month or two ago, and I was talking to my friend Jerry, who we met at Heavy Montreal, and he gave me a bunch of suggestions. And he suggested this artist, and I listened to this album the first time, and I was like, this is really good. And then I listened to it the second time, and I'm like, wow, this is even better. And John, if I told you I might listen to this album as often as I listen to the number 2 and number 1 spots, I think you'd be shocked. Ladies and gentlemen, number 3, Disagree by Poppy. There is something about this album that just has me pulled in. From the title track, the opening track, Concrete, songs like Fill the Crown, even the extended edition of this album has extra tracks that are just incredible. It's heavy, it's melodic. It actually sounds it does sound poppy per se at times. The way this album flows, the way this album is written, it's nothing that's, would blow your mind technically, but in terms of the writing, the mixing, and the tracking, I think it's one of my favorites. And I think going into 2021 and into the 2020s, this album is going to be one I'm going to remember for a while. I know you and I, as much wrestling as we watch, we're familiar with her stuff when they use her stuff for theme music for NXT pay-per-views generally. But I don't really pay attention because I'm like, oh, I'm a pop singer, cool, whatever. Right. But after this album, I'm invested, and I suggest it. And right. Jerry, if you watch this, thank you very much for the suggestion. Okay, number 2. Number 2 might come off a little bit of a shock, but John, I knew you knew this was going to be on this list. Number 2, Virus by Haken. As I've gotten older, Haken has become that band for me. I probably look forward to their releases the most, not to knock anybody else, but Haken for me has been, ever since their second album, Visions, I've gotten bigger and bigger into them. Virus comes as this accumulation of everything that they have done, just a solid release. We have tracks, like Carousel, which we love. Even the singles, Invasion. Oh, they are all master writers. Ross Jennings has a wonderful voice. The tracking on it's great. It flows well, and this album gets better with every listen. I think at the end with Only Stars, it kind of, it's one of those, we just had an extra track, I'm going to leave it here. I always have a problem with that. That never sits well in my mouth with albums. Haken released another solid release, and I'll tell you, John, this is the band who I cannot wait to see the most when we get to go see shows again. So for people who know me, Haken's Virus probably should have been my number 1 album of the year. I think when that album came out, John could have looked at my top 10 and gone, that's his number 1. It's one of those predictable things. But it wasn't. It was not. There was another album that came out this year, which we actually reviewed. This album tore the roof off of my whole 2020. I'm still listening to this album start to finish. And it's perfect. It's great. It's amazing. It sounds great. It's the Ocean Collective, Phanerozoic 2, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. So I saw these guys, like I mentioned before, when Pelagio came out. I listened to the last album. The last album was really good. When Jurassic came out, the first single, I was like, oh, this is the Ocean. This is heavy. This is melodic. This is everything the Ocean's about. And then the album came out and opened up Triassic with that beat, that weird vocal line, the way it flows. It just chills down my spine. And that whole album does that. Between the Mesozoic pieces and the Cenozoic pieces. I think Eocene was the instrumental one. That one, great instrumental track. The last track, Holocene, it's cool when it brings it back to where Triassic started off. I have nothing to say about this album that's negative. If you talk about 2020 and how it's been rough for people, I think from, the way this album flows can almost pinpoint the flow of everyone's 2020. That is my number 1 album of 2020. Finn. And that was my top 10 list for 2020. Let us know in the comment section below what you thought. What are your top 10s? What were your favorite albums of 2020? What did the review realm miss? Yeah, there you have it, folks. Each of our top 10s for the year. I hope that this year hasn't been too bad for you. Both of us do. I hope that, a lot of the music that maybe you've visited this year, has helped you with, any rough patch that you're possibly going through. Thankfully, we still have access to the music. We can still
talk about it like this channel does virtually and everything like that. But let us know in the comment section below what your favorite albums were for 2020. We have a lot to discuss, when the new year hits, 2021, and we're going to be seeing you for those album reviews when the new year starts. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you in 2021.